Hello, this is Mediocrity, the Ninjago guy, and here I am making a tier list for the LEGO Battles Ninjago free play meta. Now, a couple things before we start. This is going to be 500 starting bricks and pre-built bases on. Reason for that is with pre-built bases on, it just makes the game just less slow. You're going to build a barracks first anyway, so you might as well just have pre-builts on. And for 500 starting bricks, it gives the most amount of meta options. The higher starting bricks you go, the less viable heroes there are. So 500 starting bricks just gives almost the entire cast a chance to shine. So starting off with Cole. Cole is sort of a great example that we can look at to sort of explain what it means to be a good hero in LEGO Battles Ninjago. Now, whenever you look at his stats, they're pretty impressive, especially in his second form. He has 1,900 HP, he has 81.5 DPS, and if he uses Rally Cry on himself, that gets boosted up to 120, which is a huge DPS value, and 1,125 bricks to build. Now, the unfortunate thing about Cole is that he's sort of outclassed in both of his forms, and for his second form, which is probably the more impressive, he is outclassed by Zombie 2, who also has Rally Cry, and the same amount of HP, the same cost between both the base form and the upgrade, except Zombie, before a boost, has 124.2 DPS, which is absolutely insane. So Cole 2, he's definitely good, but not as good as Zombie is. And the same thing with Cole 1. There's going to be a lot of comparisons and references to Wrestler, and we will get to him eventually. But unfortunately, Cole, he has just really good DPS, actually even better than Wrestler 1. Slightly worse HP, very similar spell lineup. He has Earthquake as his damaging spell, rather than Fireworks. They both have Stone Skin, except for Cole's upgrade costs 500 bricks, where Wrestler's is only 250. He has half the cost. So, you can use Cole, you will succeed with him if you know what you're doing, but he isn't the best choice for a power hero because there's other heroes who have simply even higher inflated stats and even lower cost than he does. So, that said, I'm going to put him in the C tier. Moving from a straightforward hero to one of the weirder heroes in this game is Jay. Now, Jay is an example of sort of a mid-game stunner hero. By mid-game, I mean it costs around 1,000 bricks. In the case of Jay, between his base form and his upgrade, it's 875, so he's doing pretty good. Whenever you look at his stats, they're very, very unimpressive, particularly his HP. He only has 700 HP, and that is honestly his main downfall. But he is completely redeemed by his spells. Particularly in his second form, he has Spinjitzu Electroshock, which he can use in the best case scenario to deal 1,000 damage to all units in range while also stunning them for 5 seconds. This sounds completely broken on paper, and it is arguably the best spell in the entire game, and of course it is a J exclusive. The drawback, again, is just that he's really, really inconsistent. First, the spell's range, it's pretty limited, so it's very likely that you can just whiff, and instantly Jay's bad stats become much more of a problem. He doesn't have that spell to use as a crutch, and especially with 700 HP, there is a chance that you'll maybe cast the spell but not be able to get off the full effect in time. And so Jay, he is one of the premier late game stunners. He's very, very good in that role because of his damaging spell, but it lasts for a shorter duration than Flashbang, much shorter actually, it's about 8 seconds shorter, and his spell damage can be really, really inconsistent. Jay is a very good hero if you are already winning, and that's sort of his main problem, is just his consistency. But still, he's very, very good as a late game stunner, so I'm going to put him in B. Speaking of stunning heroes, next up we have Kai. Kai is a very big beneficiary of the 500 starting brick meta. He can't really do anything all by himself because his damage is just too low, and his stats really aren't that impressive in his first form, but he has Flashbang, arguably the most centralizing spell in the entirety of LEGO Battles Ninjago. And he can use this in conjunction with a good base form hero like maybe Pharaoh or Garmadon or Zombie, and the combination of Kai and a good base form hero can pretty much 2v1 any of the early upgrades, including Wrestler, so long as you space that flashbang correctly. And therefore, Kai is a pretty big cornerstone of the early meta in LEGO Battles Ninjago. Again, he can't really do anything by himself because of his bad stats, but his cheap access to Flashbang, he's the cheapest Flashbang hero in the whole game, is what really, really cements him as probably the best supporting hero in the entire game. And it's not just limited to defense either, he can pair with Wrestler and just form a very, very scary combo that makes Wrestler even harder to stop. Granted, it's a little bit more expensive, but if you can get them both, absolutely use them. That said, Kai is instantly going into S tier. There's no question about it. He is just that good of an early game hero because Flashbang is just that good of a spell. Moving on to yet another ninja who is capable of stunning is Zane. Zane sort of fulfills a similar niche to Jay in the late game. He notably has much better health. He has 1,250, that's the same as Whiplash, who's sort of the de facto standard flashbang hero in the late game. The one advantage that Zane has over Whiplash is that his combined total is only 755 LEGO bricks, as opposed to Whiplash's 1,000. And that can be useful if you just want to get a stunning hero a little bit earlier. The main drawback is just that Zane has slightly less damage, but more importantly, he has a worse version of the flashbang spell. Jay also has a version of the spell that doesn't stun for quite as long, but Zane's version does not deal damage, and Jay's does. So Zane has the drawback of only stunning for 5 seconds, which makes him a less appealing late game stunner compared to Whiplash. But with that said, Zane is still pretty good. He does have a purpose of just being a hero who you can purchase earlier to get that stunning utility. I'm gonna say he's probably worse than Jay, just because even though Jay has significantly less health, he does have that damaging spell. But Zane is still pretty good. Like I said, he has a role. So, moving on to another late game support hero, we have Nia. So Nia is sort of the first of the late game healers, and unfortunately I just don't have a very high opinion of late game healers in general. It's sort of like flashbang heroes that they're meant to support your army late, only flashbang heroes can somewhat substitute as power heroes because you can just go in and use the relatively okay stats along with the stunning spell to get some damage, whereas the healers, they absolutely need to have another hero. They don't have a job to do, they can't do it by themselves, they need someone to heal. And the case of group heal specifically, it scales a bit worse into the late game. The way that healing works is that army heal is a spell that can be cast anywhere and heals your entire army for 75% of their health. Whereas Group Heal, it has that smaller range, but it also caps out at 2,000 health. Now, early on, that's, pretty good. There's not going to be a group of heroes probably that has more than 2,000 health, but later on, when you're using maybe the likes of Pharaoh specifically, Army Heal is going to actually end up being a little bit better for healing purposes. So late healers are sort of in this awkward spot where their healing utility isn't really that necessary. It's often better to just go for a second power hero than try and get a late game healer. But with that said, Group Heal is still a pretty good spell. Nia specifically has a cost of 1,075 bricks to get, which is, a bit more expensive than the flashbang heroes. And again, I would probably just recommend going for a second power hero instead of one power hero and one healer. But if you are going for a late game healer, and I guess there can be some situations, Nia's not terrible. Again, it's just her role is not very important. So I'm going to put her below Cole, also in C tier. Moving on to one of the worst heroes in the game is Samurai. Everything great that I mentioned about Cole's second form, particularly the DPS, Samurai just completely lacks. He has a pretty similar cost to Cole. Cole is 1,125 bricks for that second form, whereas Samurai's second form is 1,020. So it's a bit better, only Cole has Rally Cry and 81.5 DPS, whereas Samurai has just 24. So you're spending all this money to get a hero who just can't really damage anything. The AoE spells are fine, I guess, but there's no reason you should spend that amount of bricks for just a hero who's this bad. So yeah, he's going in the top of F. Moving on to the last of the ninja is Sensei Wu. This hero would be so much better if the base form was not 500 starting bricks. That's honestly just the main thing that holds him back. Even then, his stats just really aren't that great. His second form has Army Heal, which is, nice, but again, it's sort of late game healer syndrome, where that's a combined cost, if you're not starting with him, of 1,250 bricks. That's the same as it costs to just build Pharaoh 1, the best late game hero in the entire game. So you really don't have a reason to purchase him. And then for his first upgrade, it's even more expensive. Instead of 750 bricks to upgrade, it's 875, or 1,375 if you're factoring in the 500 cost base form. And what you get in return is a hero with just barely over 1,000 health, just not that impressive at all, and a admittedly really, really good spell in Fiery Touch. It's sort of an instant delete button. It only works on one enemy hero or one building or whatever, but sort of the issue with that is that you're spending all of these bricks just to get a worse version of, another instant delete button, of which, half the cast can do that. I mean, you look at Jay right here, he's, claim to fame is an AoE spell that is just an instant delete button for everything around him, and Sensei Wu is demanding the same amount of bricks, so the only way that you can really take advantage of that spell is if you start with him. And he has a good base form, but it's overall just not worth it at all. So, along the same lines of heroes who are not worth it, we have the first of the skeleton crew, Chopov. Chopov is terrible. unfortunately. He just has terrible stats in both forms. His first form is just a strictly worse version of Wrestler. You're going to hear that a lot. Again, they both have Stone Skin, except for Wrestler's DPS is 76.5. Very, very impressive. Meanwhile, Chopov's DPS is much, much lower. It's only 25.2. That's about 1/3 of the DPS. And of course, he cost even more. It's 375 bricks to purchase that upgrade instead of Wrestler's 250. And Chopov's base form is good, but that's really all he has. His second form has even less HP than his first upgrade, and it costs 875 bricks. Just don't ever use Chopov. He's so bad. Next up is Frackjaw. Frackjaw is a very, very weird hero. Him and Jay probably have the best spell list in the entire game. Notably, Frackjaw has Magic Steel and Group Heal in his first form, and Fiery Touch and Flashbang, two amazing spells in his second form. The issue then is just that Frackjaw has terrible stats, no matter what form. His second form, I mean, the HP is pretty good, it's almost 1600, but both forms just have terrible, terrible DPS. Fiery Touch can sort of save the second form, but it's probably more worth it just to cast Flashbang. And if you're going for a late Flashbang hero, you might as well choose Whiplash, who is less expensive and has better damage, or, choose Jay or Zane, or someone like that. Don't choose Frackjaw. And you might be tempted to use his first form for the healing plus Magic Steel, and, it is pretty cheap. He has Group Heal. It's only 450 total Lego bricks, except Santa has Army Heal and better stats for only 440. So Frackjaw, unfortunately, is just completely outclassed in this role. Still, I mean, his stats are bad, but the second or first best spell list in the entire game is going to probably put him at the bottom of C, maybe top of D, but yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend Frackjaw, but you can make him work just by virtue of his amazing spell list. Moving on to Crazy. Crazy is a bit of an oddball hero. His first form is just a strictly worse version of Jay. Has less HP, just 25 less, just off the bat. Has a significantly worse spell. J1's Spinjitzu spell is actually very, very good. Does a lot of damage, whereas Crazy spell just is not that at all. But the second form is very interesting in that it gives you pretty much a huge health sponge, 2,200 health for only 800 total Lego bricks. And the DPS is bad, it's only 38.25, but this is the highest health hero that you are going to be able to get for a while. Definitely the highest health hero in that bracket of costs. So that can give him sort of an interesting role. I don't really know how good it is, but, it is worth noting that that second form has a very, very high health total for how much it costs. So I guess I'll put him below Sensei. Seems pretty fair, but that's subject to change. So the next of the skeletons is Cruncha. Cruncha is very, very similar to Cold 2, and they have very, very similar stats. Just comparing the two, Cruncha has 109.45 DPS, which is better than Cold 2 without Rally Cry, but if Cole uses Rally Cry, then he ends up just being a little bit better. They have very similar health. Crunch is just a little bit more expensive at 1,150 total, but with a more expensive base form So it's generally worth it to use Coal. In a no-spell context, Cruncha is a little bit better, but Coal with Rally Cry is just going to end up being very slightly better. That said, they're very, very similar heroes. They're pretty much interchangeable. Moving on to Knuckle. Knuckle's a pretty weird hero in that his second upgrade form actually has very, very good stats, enough to where you probably should not use the form with Flashbang. That form, his first form, is just a worse version of Kai. It costs more, has only slightly more health, worse DPS, just don't use it. The second form has 1,425 HP, which for only 500 bricks to upgrade, that's 700 in total. That's pretty good. He can kind of go toe-to-toe with Wrestler with his 95.4 DPS. The one advantage that Wrestler has is just his spell list. He has Stone Skin and Fireworks, but in a no-spell context, Knuckle just is strictly better, and he also has the fastest build time for his base form, so if you lose him and he's defeated, then you can get him back very, very, very quickly. And so this sort of opens up a niche that only Knuckle can really fill as a early game hero that you can pick either alongside Wrestler or to counter Wrestler. The issue is that you sort of have to go all in with this. The upgrade is 500 Lego bricks, and of course if you're starting with 500, that means you have to start with Knuckle in your first hero slot, and that has to be the first upgrade you purchase, and that will leave you significantly behind on the economy. But I mean, he's still a very, very good early hero, so I'm going to put him probably right here, just below J. Seems pretty fair. Next up is Samakai. Samakai is another hero who just unfortunately cost 500 bricks to build in his base form. So this leaves him in a very, very sad place. His first form is just a worse version of Cole 1. He has pretty much the same spell list. He has even less HP. He has the same DPS, only, again, the base form cost is 500 and not 250. And his cost to upgrade is 550 instead of 500, so that is 1,050 Lego bricks to get a worse version of Cole 1, who was already a worse version of Wrestler 1, so it's not looking good for him. And late game, he can heal, he has army heal, but again, why would you spend a total of 1,750 Lego bricks to get an army healer when Pharaoh is right there? Just spend your bricks on him instead, please. Now, that said, if you do get him late, I guess he has good stats. They're pretty respectable. It's the best of the army healers, but sort of the whole thing with army heal is that you don't have to see any direct combat, so it almost completely goes against the entire reason to just buy Samakai in the first place. Now, to be fair to him, like I said, his stats are good if you're able to get him, but there's just really no reason. Even like with Sensei Wu, yeah, his base form is 500 bricks, but at least it's a good base form, whereas Samakai doesn't even have that. He cannot 2v1 Wrestler alongside Kai's Flashbang. His base form just does not have the damage, so yeah, he's pretty bad, unfortunately, in the context of 500 starts. He would be better with 2,000, but he's just simply not worth the upgrade cost at all. The last of the Skulkin Generals, on the other hand, is actually pretty good. It's Whiplash. I've talked about him a little bit before, but he's pretty much the standard go-to late flashbang hero. Just listing off some stats real quick. He's got 84 DPS, 1,250 health, it's the same as Zane, 1,000 cost, and flashbang and magic steal. So yeah, he's pretty much the standard of comparison for all late flashbang heroes. He's There's not really much else to say about him. He's not particularly flashy, but he gets the job done. So yeah, he's probably going to go into A tier. He's arguably the best of the late flashbang heroes. He's not going to be contributing quite as much as the power heroes, but again, he's probably the best of the late supporting crew. Um, Even better than, Jay, who has, his nearly 1,000 damage spell nuke. Whiplash just has the consistency. He has that 13-second stun flashbang. He has much more health. So he really is just the definition of all reliable. You can't really go wrong with going with Whiplash. So moving on to the heroes that you unlock, not from the Ninjago campaign, but the free play exclusive heroes. First up is Alien Commander. Very, very similar to Nia, but a bit worse. They are both late healers. Alien Commander notably has more health, but less DPS, and costs a little bit more. And instead of Nia's very useful Magic Steel, he has Space Laser, which it's a good AoE spell, but if you're going and picking him to heal your army, then you probably don't want to use Space Laser. You probably just want to use your power hero to deal all that damage for you instead. So late healers are, again, not very good in my opinion anyway. I'm really not sold on this guy. Moving on. So next up are two heroes that are pretty similar to each other, Biff and Brickbeard. Now, on paper, they would be really, really good power heroes if it wasn't for their DPS. Both of their upgrades cost 1,250 bricks, the same as Pharaoh 1, only, again, their DPS is just terrible. Biff is a bit cheaper with his base form. It's only 125 bricks instead of Brickbeard's 375. He has a little bit more HP, but less DPS. He has, at least Boulder Toss is a pretty good AoE spell, but again, why would you ever purchase Biff or Brickbeard when Pharaoh is right there? Has just so much better health, better damage, better spells, just better everything. Also doesn't have a big hitbox, which is another thing that a lot of these units run into, is that big hitbox units can sort of get stuck on background objects like trees and stuff. Pharaoh doesn't have that problem, Biff does. At least Samakai can heal late, Biff doesn't even have that. So, yeah, he's going bottom of D tier. Brickbeard, again, pretty similar. Less health, more damage. He has Artillery, which is actually one of the best AoE damage spells in the whole game, just because you can spam it as a very, very low cost. It can delete builders, it can deal a lot of damage to buildings. Except, again, he just costs so much and just does not have the damage to back it up. So, honestly, you could go either way. Biff is cheaper, but Brickbeard is a little bit better stat-wise, so really doesn't matter where you put him. I'm just going to do this, but you could honestly flip the two and it really wouldn't matter. Moving on to another hero with Artillery, who is also a bottom tier in this game, unfortunately, is Broadside. Now, Broadside's main issue in this game is that all of his upgraded forms just have terrible stats. It's very similar to Chopov, where he does not have a form with above 875 HP. Chopov is only barely better in that regard. And Broadside's damage is also just terrible in both forms. In fact, his highest DPS is in his base form, funnily enough, which is 31.5, just still pretty terrible when, when wrestlers were running around with more than twice that damage. Broadside has Artillery, I guess, which might put him above Chopov, but Either way, you should not use either of those heroes. They're just terrible. Yeah, Broadside really fell off from his debut in the original LEGO Battles, so womp womp. Moving on to King. King is almost a hybrid between a late healer and a power hero. If we're just comparing him to Cole real quick, they both have a way to boost their own damage, and King's DPS is actually pretty good. In the second form, it's almost 70 DPS, so when boosted with Ravage, that's close to 105. And 1425 health is also, pretty good. And his second upgrade, combined with his base form, is the exact same cost. It's 1,125. The issue, again, is you could spend those bricks, to get a supporting hero with group heal and Ravage, you can deal damage. Or you could just get Zombie 2, who has better health, better damage, It's, again, much more worth it, in my opinion, to just go for a power hero immediately, rather than getting a healer to support your early game heroes. Just go for the power hero first, and you can run them both, but by that point, you got Pharaoh running around, and it's just not really worth it to go for a late hero. But the fact that he's sort of combined with a power hero, Ravage is good, it gives him notably a niche that Cole doesn't have. I still wouldn't necessarily recommend him, but I'll put him at the bottom of B tier just because at least he can heal, whereas Cole can't do that. Now, King's stats are a little bit worse, but again, he sort of makes up for that with the fact that he can heal late. So, again, bottom of B. Next up, the man of the hour, the King Kahuka equivalent. We got Lance Spears. Let me put it this way. The form with the highest health is his second upgraded form with only 500. That is the most health that Lance will ever have. And you could make the argument as, oh yeah, well his forms are cheap, you could use them early, except for he's just actively a liability. Why would you ever use Lance when you can use Wrestler, or Kai, or a base form, or anything like that? His spells aren't even particularly good. He's the worst hero in the game for a reason. You could maybe make the argument that Chopov or Broadside are worse, just because they have upgrades that cost more, but Lance's ceiling, again, 500 HP, and the DPS isn't better either, despite what the stars might tell you. He's just terrible. Do not ever use Lance Spears. So, moving on from Lance, we actually have a pretty good hero right here with Officer. Now, Officer is sort of an alternative that you can pick instead of Whiplash. He might not have that consistency. He has a little bit less health. He has 1,000 health, but his DPS is 82.5, which is only slightly worse than Whiplash. The nice thing about Officer is that A, he's a level 2 hero, meaning that he can probably cast Flashbang twice in a row because of his higher mana pool, and B, Whiplash's base form costs 375 bricks. So if you lose Whiplash and need to get him again, that's going to cost a lot. Whereas Officer's is only 75 bricks, so his second upgrade might be more expensive at 925, but if you're going to go for both the base form and the upgrade, then it ends up being even. They're both 1,000, and if you lose Officer, again, he's cheaper to replace than Whiplash. Unfortunately, he has a big hitbox, and again, that combined with his lower HP pool means that he won't be probably quite as consistent, but he has, some advantages, and I'd probably put him right next to Whiplash. They're pretty similar heroes. Next up is Garmadon. If you look at his first upgrade, then you might be tempted to say, oh, this is an amazing power hero, you know, he has such good DPS at a pretty affordable cost, it's only slightly above Knuckle, except he can't attack from specific angles. For whatever reason, the Ninjago devs just messed up his range value to where he can only attack, I think it's to his right, and this just makes him pretty much completely unusable with his first upgrade. His second upgrade is not much better. He has a high health pool, and that's literally all. His DPS is terrible. He costs even more than Pharaoh, so he's just not worth it to upgrade. But with that said, with 500 starts specifically, you can pick him first and have the best base form hero in the entire game. And this is helpful for a number of reasons. First, you can scout with him, and that can be helpful just because, again, if you're going up against another base form hero, you're going to come out on top unless it's a Garmadon Ditto. He's also the fastest base form hero, so you can retreat very easily. And he's good on defense too. You can combine with Kai 1, and the duo of them can pretty comfortably beat Wrestler 1, assuming that you get the click and you land Flashbang, which that's easier said than done. But because he is the best base form in the game, I'm going to put him in A tier, but with the caveat of, again, you have to pick him first, and that can be sort of restricting. So while he is good, and he is similar to Kai, that he's sort of a cornerstone of the early game meta, which is most of LEGO Battles Ninjago, you do have to pick him first, and so he doesn't have quite the same level of splash ability as Kai, so I'm just going to put him in A instead of S, but make no mistake, he's still very, very good early, you just can't really use him late. So, speaking of good heroes, we have Pharaoh. Pharaoh 1, well, I suppose I should just let the stats speak for themselves. Pharaoh 1 has 3,150 HP, 148 DPS, and the only thing holding him back is that it is a total cost of 1,500 bricks, 250 for the base form, and 1,250 for the upgrade. But with that said, he is, stat for stat, the best hero in LEGO Battles Ninjago. If you have Pharaoh in the late game and your opponent doesn't, it's pretty much just an instant win. So the entire late game meta completely warps around the existence of Pharaoh. He is just that good. The stats honestly speak for themselves. He can solo pretty much any army that the opponent has, unless again they have Pharaoh themselves. So you might not see him all the time in the late game. The late game might not come to exist because Ninjago is so rush heavy, but he will do more for you, arguably, over the course of a game if you do have him versus Kai. So I think it's still pretty worthy to put him in the S tier, just because, again, it cannot be understated how amazing of a late game hero he is. Moving on to Rex. Rex is pretty similar to Pharaoh. Without the boost from spells, he has the highest DPS in the entire game. The issue is that, again, he's the same cost as Pharaoh, which is a bit annoying. He has a big hitbox, which means that he's harder to use, and his slow speed doesn't really do him any favors. And he only has 2,200 HP, compared to Pharaoh, who has nearly 1,000 HP more. So ultimately, this means that Rex is a good late power hero, but he's probably not going to be your first, your second, or really even your third pick as a power hero. There are just better options available. If you use him, you will, find success if your opponent doesn't have a power hero, in sort of the same regard as Pharaoh, although he isn't nearly as centralizing. His DPS is good, but that's about it. His spells don't really do him any favors. I'll put him... this seems fair. I could see a little bit higher, a little bit lower, depending on personal preference. Again, he's not terrible, he's just unfortunately outclassed. Sort of the same thing as Knuckle. Don't use his flashbang form. Kai is better. His stats just can't hold up. He's too expensive, which is funny because he's not really expensive at all, but compared to Kai, that is still pretty expensive, so don't use his flashbang form. If you are going to use him, just stick to his first upgrade and use him late. Moving on to Spaceman. Spaceman is just not a very good hero, unlike Classic Space, who had to be banned for competitive play in the original LEGO battles. Spaceman's one thing that he can kind of do is heal, and as an early healer at 500 bricks, he's not bad. He has pretty average stats for an early healer. It's pretty similar to Wrestler 2 and Santa, only Santa notably has army heal. Spaceman is just stuck with group heal, meaning that he has to be on the front lines with pretty mediocre stats. His second form, it's actually pretty funny. He has worse stats than Wrestler for every single stat except for speed, and instead of being 250 bricks for the upgrade, it's 875, so it's honestly pretty terrible. The one thing that you can do with him is heal, which I suppose sort of gives him some advantage, maybe, above these three heroes right here, so I'll put him right there, but I also can absolutely see the argument for him being a bottom 7 unit, part of the worst army in the game, just because he doesn't really do anything besides early healing, and again, you have much better options for early game healers. So, moving on to the next hero, we have Spartan. If you take a look at the stats, Spartan is very, very similar to both Cole and Cruncha, and actually Spartan has Ravage, which is another way of boosting his damage. Spartan 2 has 76.5 DPS and 1890 HP, with an upgrade cost of 1125, so that's the same as Cole. He's, again, a little bit worse than Cole, but with spells, a little bit better than Cruncha. Again, he sort of suffers from that same big hitbox issue that Cruncha does, but with spells, he's just got slightly higher DPS. Again, there isn't really much of a difference between these three heroes. You can sort of use them interchangeably, they all do the same thing. Funnily enough, they're all just outclassed by Zombie. But, you know, they're not terrible, they're just kind of okay, outclassed but okay power heroes, and they all just kind of do the same thing, so I'm just going to lump them all together at the top of C tier. The next hero has seen a massive upgrade from his appearance in LEGO Battles, and that is Wizard. Wizard is almost sort of a clone character of Pharaoh 1. He has the exact same HP. He has only slightly lower DPS at 146.25, which it's funny how that's considered lower, but he has a slightly better AoE spell with Boulder Toss instead of Fireworks. His main drawback, besides his slightly lower DPS, is that he just is a big unit, so he's going to be harder to control. The AI pathfinding is worse, he's not going to be as reliable. But, again, he's pretty much the exact same as Pharaoh. In fact, his base form has an even lesser cost. It's only 125 LEGO bricks instead of the 250, so he's a bit cheaper to purchase and replace, just in terms of base forms, but again, he's pretty much the exact same as Pharaoh, just very, very slightly worse, so he's still going in S tier. So, we only have 3 heroes left, and all of them are absolutely fantastic, including my pick for the #1 hero in LEGO Battles Ninjago. It's Wrestler. Wrestler is the hero that completely warps the game. I've mentioned his stats before, but for only 250 LEGO bricks to upgrade, or 500 total if we include the base form, he gets 76.5 DPS, he gets 950 health, which is boosted further by Stone Skin, which multiplies his defense by 1.5, so he's very, very tanky, considering his low cost. And he has Fireworks, which is a very spammable AoE spell. Wrestler can 1v1 any hero that is less expensive than Knuckle, too, which is absolutely insane. He just has such a stranglehold on the early game. In fact, Kai is the main counter to using Wrestler, and he can't even counter him by himself. You need another base form hero alongside Kai. So, yeah, Wrestler, I've talked about him some previously in the video, but in order to win at LEGO Battles Ninjago, at least just in competitive PvP, you either have to use Wrestler, or you have to have a very good strategy to counter him. And oftentimes it's easier to just use Wrestler. You get such a big advantage from rushing. You can kill builders very easily with Fireworks, and so the only real threat to using Wrestler is if your opponent picks Garmadon or another good base form hero and Kai, and even then they still have to land the click, they still have to land the flashbang. It's not free, and of course you can just use Wrestler alongside Kai, you can just use them both, and that beats pretty much every single early composition that you can realistically think of. There's a few workarounds, but again, it's not easy, and it all just comes from the sheer power of Wrestler, respective to just how cheap he is. His only major downfall is just that his base form takes a little longer to build, and it is 250 bricks, which is kind of annoying in the early game, but for the amount of power you get, yeah, there's no denying that Wrestler is probably the most centralizing unit in 500 brick starts for LEGO Battles Ninjago, even more than Pharaoh. In fact, Wrestler is probably the reason that you won't see Pharaoh that often, because a late game won't be able to exist in the first place if you just fall victim to a Wrestler rush, or you win yourself just using Wrestler. He is just that good, and you have to have a plan to either use him or counter him. So, that said, only 2 heroes left. Next up is, honestly, probably my favorite hero in the game. It's debatable whether it's him or Wrestler. Him or Pharaoh. Not a huge fan of Wrestler, but it's partially just because he's so good. Anyways, it is Zombie. Zombie is a pretty unique hero in that he's similar enough to Pharaoh. He's a very, very good late game power hero, only his main draw is that he is cheaper. He's only 1125 total bricks instead of 1500, meaning that you can actually get him a little bit earlier and start the late game sort of storm of the enemy base just a little bit quicker. Of course, this doesn't work if you both pick Zombie, but sort of in the scenario where you are going for Zombie before Pharaoh and your opponent's going for Pharaoh first, that does give you a little bit of time where you have a late game hero and your opponent doesn't, so that can be nice. Plus, he has, if he uses Rally Cry on himself, the highest boosted DPS in the game. His DPS goes from 124.2 to over 180, which is absolutely insane DPS. He can two-shot a lot of base forms of good heroes. He two-shots base Wizard, he two-shots base Wrestler with that upgrade. Of course, Magic Steel does hold him back, and he doesn't have a very good AoE spell, but the fact that he is such an affordable late-game power hero, in my opinion, gives him a notable advantage above Rex, and in fact, I think I'm going to put him right here in A tier. One last thing about him, his base form is very, very good. It's the third best base form of the whole game, right behind Spartan at number 2 and Garmadon at number 1. And that sort of means that you can use him early alongside Kai. Of course, he's not going to be as good. If your opponent picks Garmadon, then of course he loses. But, you know, having a more than one option to counter Wrestler early is very, very nice, especially one that has very, very good long-term prospects, unlike Garmadon, who is exclusively delegated to just early game utility. And the last hero in the game we're talking about is Santa. There's a reason that I haven't really mentioned healers all that much, and that's just because Santa has a total cost of 440 bricks and can use Army Heal. So this sort of means a couple things. It's sort of like Kai, that he has bad stats, but they almost don't matter for the role that he's going for. He is specifically meant to be a late game healer, and with the added bonus of that he's available sort of early game too, and the reason that he scales so well into the late game is that because you don't really need to use him for combat at all. Like I said, you can just sort of hang back, you can use him at your own base on defense, and if you are rushing whenever your heroes get low on health, you can just switch over to Santa and just use Army Heal without putting him in any sort of danger, which gives him a huge leg up from the group healers such as, you know, King, Nia, Alien Commander, any of the early group healers like Wrestler 2 or maybe Fracjaw or Spaceman. And so this sort of makes him the best healer in the game, in my opinion. It's not particularly close either. He is the cheapest healer as well, which is kind of funny considering just how nice Army Heal is, that it just scales so well into the late game, while also providing early game utility. Magic Steal is pretty nice if your base is getting raided pretty early, but the main draw to using Santa is just that early Army Heal. He should definitely be one of the heroes that you prioritize getting right up there with Wrestler and Kai. Again, he's not going to be doing much by himself, similar to Kai. The added benefit of healing isn't quite as potent as Flashbang, especially early on. Flashbang is absolutely instrumental in either stopping a rush or helping you get a rush off the ground, but healing is still very, very good, of course, so it's debatable whether him or Zombie is better. They both do pretty different things, but I'll put him above Zombie just because he's much more splashable, he's more applicable to pretty much any team composition. So, with that said, here's my complete list of the LEGO Battles Ninjago heroes. If you would like to request a change or you want to talk about something, yeah, just let me know in the comments. Currently, the meta for this game is pretty underdeveloped. There have been a few online matches, but it hasn't been anything too serious. There aren't really a lot of players, so there's definitely a lot of room for interpretation and experimentation in this game. And yeah, I'm looking forward to what people come up with. So again, if you have any changes to this tier list, just let me know. See you.